And welcome to another edition of Spits and Suds, almost ending the off-season edition of Spits and Suds because training camp is upon us. Hey, everyone, I'm Gavin Spittle of 105.3 The Fan. You know, the cool thing about this podcast is when we get requests, we try to deliver on Twitter. When are you going to have Brien Rea on? And joining us right now from Victory Plus is the greatness of Brien Rea. Is there different makeup that you'll use for Victory Plus compared to what you used on Bally's?
Fenty by Rihanna till I die. That's how it's been for me and my camera makeup. I don't know who on Twitter was requesting me. Maybe they need to be my agent or something. But I'm glad somebody out there decided to demand you have me on. Good to talk to you again, bud.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. Actually, one of the people that did was our friend Jordan Harper up in Canada. So the cool thing about doing this podcast is we have listeners, Brien, in Canada, England, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, just a number of, and I made a mistake where I said, let me know where you live. I'm happy to visit you. And so I have some work to do.
Those are all better places than Dallas in August. So kudos to those people for enjoying the past month as they have.
Yeah, no,
in those locations.
Absolutely. So are you excited to get going? I mean, Victory Plus, a lot of news in the offseason. That's super cool. I know I interrupted a lunch between you and Sevi today. You guys are kind of dusting off the gloves and, you know, probably arguing over lunch so you can build back that chemistry. But pretty badass that you and Sevi are coming back. I make no bones about it. I love your chemistry. I think you guys are terrific together, and you do a great job analyzing the games.
Well, I appreciate that. That's very kind of you to say, and we certainly have fun working together. It's as much as we chirp each other, I've always viewed him as a big brother, little brother scenario where I'm never going to out-chirp Sevi on camera or off camera, but I've told him plenty of times, I am going down swinging. So whatever he throws at me, I'm coming back as hard as I can. I know I'm not going to win the battle, but I'm going down in a blaze of glory, trying to chirp back at him when we do this thing. But yeah, we're excited to get back. Obviously, there's a lot of moving parts when the team you work for and work with is essentially launching their own streaming channel. So there's a lot of people behind the scenes that I think their heads are already spinning, and we haven't even had a game yet. But we're excited to get back at it. I think this fan base is excited for what could be a very intriguing season with what this team has done and how they look. So I'm very much at the point where I already know that it's an 82-game process. So I'm excited to return, but I also know we have 7 months potentially of this. So you kind of take it one step at a time. You know, one of my favorite movies is Major League, right? And remember the scene where Charlie Sheen's about to play his first game and he's flipping the ball up and down and Jake Taylor walks by and grabs the ball and says, "Relax, kid. We have 161 more of these."
Yep.
Yeah, that's kind of how I have that Jake Taylor approach of like, just relax, kid. We have a long way to go in this thing. We're excited to get started, but it's going to be day one of a lot of, I think Pete DeBoer said today, 200 straight days the players have to hear him talk to them now.
Yeah. And one of the cool things about Victory Plus is I bet next year that today's opening press conferences of GM Jim Nill and Coach Pete DeBoer will be on Victory Plus. I think what I like about it for Stars fans is it's going to open up a lot of Stars content available on demand, which is something that they haven't necessarily had. So, for instance, press conferences, these preseason games, you might get one in years past, and now you're getting all of them.
It's, as you said, there's a lot of possibilities, and I'm a big believer in you have to walk before you run. So there's going to be a lot of, I think, experimenting, trial and error, and getting to know who you are as a content channel. Is it a TV channel? Is it a content channel? Is it a streaming channel? I don't even know if there's a proper term established yet for what it's going to be, but it's obviously a more accessible avenue compared to what fans have had to deal with in this market over the last 2 or 3 years. So there's going to be, I think, a lot of learning, both from the fan side, from the team side, from the operations side of what can you do well? What could you possibly do in the future? What is something you want to do, but maybe it's not quite there yet, so you put it on the list? And I don't think anybody has all the answers to those questions yet. It's kind of like when you're learning how to ride a bike for the first time, you have to really wobble your way around for a number of runs before you finally figure out how to balance yourself on it. So I would imagine there's going to be some wobbling along the way, but also it's the excitement of getting to do something like that. There's I think another way I phrased it is when you get a blank canvas to do whatever you want to do, that's really exciting until you're staring at it and realize, oh God, what do I do with this blank canvas now? That I have the freedom to do whatever I want. So yeah, so it's exciting, it's nerve-wracking, but all in all, it should be a very exciting process as we go through it this year.
That's terrific. And you were covering the press conference today and following you on Twitter. Let's talk about the headlines from today. Let's start with Jim Nill. You tweeted out on Jamie Benn's UFA status after the season, quote, "As long as I'm the general manager here, Jamie Benn is going to be a Dallas Star." I will say, I think that was a little surprising that came out. I mean, obviously things can change, but the two-time GM of the year, I mean, that's a big statement.
It is. He also had a great interview with Pierre LeBrun in The Athletic. I think it was yesterday. Maybe it was posted this morning. This being a Wednesday that we're talking right now, but I would imagine Jim Nill and Jamie Benn have had more open and honest conversations than anything that he's ever going to reveal in a press conference. Obviously, there is quite a bit of history and tenure for Jamie with this organization and what he's done, especially as the captain. So for Jim Nill to make a statement like that, it didn't, I don't want to say it surprised me. I don't want to say I expected it, but I think he's made his intentions clear that number 14 has been an integral part of this organization during his tenure as the general manager. And if Jamie wants to continue being that integral part, Jim Nill wants to do everything in his power to continue that relationship as well as it's gone. And with everything that Jamie's gone through, seeing where this organization has been, where it is, and hopefully where it's going or what it's trying to achieve in terms of the Stanley Cup. So that'll be one to sort of put in our back pocket, and we'll see what things look like a year from now. It appeared that neither side was panicked or pressed or feeling the need to force an issue. That they both understand what they feel is at stake this season, and the number one priority on everybody's part is trying to win a Stanley Cup. So great. Get on the bus, do what you can to go do it, and then other conversations can take place once that journey's done.
Yeah, very interesting, as well as Jason Robertson news, where he had surgery on his foot to remove a cyst back in August. He will not skate with the team for now. You mentioned that, he continues to rehab, and he'll miss the majority of training camp. I will say Jason Robertson is pretty used to missing some training camp a few years back with the holdout, and that turned out pretty good.
And Pete DeBoer made that same joke today. I think we're all going to make that same joke. At this point, I think Jason Robertson knows who he is as a player and as an athlete and knows his body. So navigating a situation like this, I don't think there's major cause for concern. It didn't seem like Jim Nill or Peter DeBoer were concerned that much other than just missing training camp. I'm more intrigued of you lose Joe Pavelski out of your top six. You lose Jason Robertson out of your top six for now. When Jason Robertson comes back, you know what he and Rope Hintz can do together. There's enough of a sample size to just say, all right, go do what you two do together. But who plays with those two now on that top line? Or what does the top six look like? And we could go down a deeper rabbit hole here, but me just sort of looking at this roster, I had asked Peter DeBoer about Wyatt Johnston and where does he fit in this? And Peter DeBoer acknowledged that Wyatt Johnston was probably their best forward last year, start to finish, but they need more people pushing Wyatt Johnston and not only Wyatt Johnston being the best forward. Yeah. Well, is Wyatt Johnston a top line player now? If he is a top line player, is he playing on the wing as opposed to center? Is he going to be a second line player? playing wing or center? Do you keep him on the third line where he was thriving in that center position? There's a lot of things change, I feel like, wherever you could potentially move Wyatt Johnston and who he's playing with. And because of how deep down the middle the Dallas Stars are, it's kind of like you're taking him out of his natural position lower in the lineup. You're putting him into an unnatural position higher in the lineup.
Right.
And and players these days, they are interchangeable parts. It's not like he has to reinvent the wheel or learn how to play the wing. He's done it. But there's a trickle down effect. Losing Joe Pavelski and then just in training camp for now, losing Jason Robertson, of other players being affected, where they could play, how they could play, and who they could play with. And so that's the biggest thing that I'm interested in watching, both what happens with the top six and then what happens with the D pairs, which I think everybody is watching, given the turnover the Stars had on their blue line.
Yeah, I was thinking that they might try, when Robertson comes back, Robertson, Hintz, Wyatt Johnston, roll with the line that was successful last year, Duchesne, Sagan, Marchment, and then I would insert Maverick Bourque with Logan Stankoven. And I like the familiarity that they have. And they did really well in the AHL, and I think that can pay dividends as far as, like, where he's going to be, so there's chemistry there, and put him with the veteran Jamie Benn. I really like that line, and then you fill it out with Dodonov, Steele, and then that would be your 12th and 13th forward. That way.
I think that's the path of least resistance if we're going to play the fantasy GM, fantasy coach making up our own lines.
Sure. Which we love.
We'll see how we do. Absolutely. It's why worry about the season? We can just make the lines for Peter DeBoer right now, and he doesn't have to worry about it. Like that's the whole point of being a hockey fan.
No, you're right. You're right.
Yeah. But that's I do think that feels like the simplest math. I also think you feel like the way the last 3 years have gone, you want to have Jamie Benn has been the de facto big brother to Wyatt Johnston, to Logan Stankoven, and now does he become the de facto big brother to Maverick Bourque? It kind of feels like that's the simplest way to go, and I would not be surprised if that's how things look in a handful of preseason games this year. But it's, is Wyatt Johnston going to elevate himself to the first power play unit as well? Is Wyatt Johnston, if he's going to play a top six role, does he continue killing penalties, or do they ratchet that back a little bit? There's some more trickle down economics that I think pop in to a couple of players and where they could fit into the lineup overall that are intriguing to watch. But yeah, it does feel like you elevate him to your top line because he does feel like he is trajecting himself towards a top line player with this team.
You actually kind of have the same thing going on. We mentioned Wyatt Johnston moving up to the first line. Colin Blackwell's listed as a center, but Sam Steele also is a kind of a center. And I know they're interchangeable, but I keep saying this on the podcast. When I did my Chicago preview, they were pretty upset that they lost Blackwell, and they were happy for him, but they really loved his attitude. They loved that he was a great room guy. And they said, if he's healthy, that, that's, I wouldn't say like a major factor, but it's a nice piece for a team.
Well, and if you mention health for a depth guy, the advantage the Stars have had, probably going back to last year, is they've had interchangeable parts in the bottom half of their roster. And Jim Nill addressed that depth on the blue line this summer, I think. So it's not like a player like Colin Blackwell has to play 75 games in a fourth line role or a third, fourth line hybrid role of some kind. There are bodies that can filter in and out of the lineup. And Peter DeBoer has always been honest. Performance does play a part of it on who can check in, who can check out. So that battle for a 12th and 13th forward will be interesting, because I would feel like he's kind of in that mix, that 11, 12, 13 forward conversation. It does feel like the majority of the group of 12 up front is fairly set, except for maybe those bottom spots or those depth spots. So, it's you're always intrigued to see what the new players look like and what they might be able to do. Like Sam Steele came in here and fit like a glove, I thought, to play in a bottom six role like that. Yeah, and he had the opportunity to possibly pursue other opportunities this past summer and chose to come back. So there's clearly some comfort that he's feeling as well with this team here.
You also tweeted out about Jake Ottinger, that he's a restricted free agent with arbitration rights after this year. You mentioned Jim Nill has not talked with him yet, but will acknowledge there's a few other contracts out there that could shape the market more than have yet to be determined. Let his focus on Boston and Jeremy Swayman is what he was trying to say. Because when Swayman signs, I think that's going to be the number that the Ottinger camp obviously is going to look at. Kind of a similar path. In fact, it's kind of interesting that both will be fighting for that Four Nations spot around the All-Star break, as it'll be Thatcher Demko, it'll be Jeremy Swayman, it'll be Jake Ottinger, and Connor Hellebuck. Those are kind of the four goalies, and they'll only take three. So I know it's important for Jake, and it's interesting about the Swayman camp. Don Sweeney was pretty vocal today about, reports and, how they were false. So it's a little bit contentious as far as, Boston's concerned because, especially with the offseason trade, that Jeremy Swayman's now your guy. So I'm excited for Jake because I think he has a lot to play for this year.
I would agree, and I'm excited too. And I was curious about Jake just because, we've heard some stuff on Wyatt. Obviously, we were all on Thomas Harley watch. It just kind of felt like Jake was one of those names that has not been mentioned yet. But I feel like there's a lot of moving parts or potentially moving parts coming up here because you have Ottinger, who's an RFA. Wyatt Johnston is going to be an RFA.
Yeah.
Jamie Benn's number is coming off the books and potentially could be looking different. And all of these pieces affect all of the other pieces given the salary cap world. So, yes, I think a lot of goaltenders are watching the Swayman number to see what does the market look like and what does he set. And you mentioned that being a number that Jake Ottinger's camp would look at. They're both 25. They both have similar service times. Swayman's numbers are a little bit better. There's that behind the scenes battle that always goes on between agent and GM on what's fair market value. And Jim Nill acknowledged today, look, players deserve to be paid fairly, but also there is a cost of doing business if you want to play on a really good NHL team. And that is you cannot have too much of your cap sucked up in one direction or one area. There's depth that has to be established. And you can look at every Stanley Cup champion and see that in play. So that's sort of the catch-22 that everybody's involved in is you want to be on a good team and have a chance at winning the Stanley Cup, but you also want fair market value for who you are as a player and how much do you want to move the needle on the market. So, yeah, you mentioned the Swayman contract. I was always curious. Now, the economics have changed, but the number of I think Connor Hellebuck, when he signed his second or third contract after his bridge deal with Winnipeg, that was I think it was like 6.17, 6.2, something like that. But that's in 2017-18 or 2018-19. Right. The economics have certainly changed since then. But I think that's another contract. If you're looking for a window of where Jake Ottinger might fall, or a floor, like a starting number where he might fall, and then we'll see what the Swayman number looks like. All of that's going to come into play. And after all of that and all those players that I just mentioned to you, fast forward 2 years down the line, and we get to Jason Robertson's RFA status. Jeez. And that whole scenario now recycles everything back. So I never envy a GM in a position like this, but also a GM puts himself in this kind of position because him and his scouting staff are doing something right of finding good players that are producing and forcing him in this situation. So it's kind of one of those, it's a difficult scenario to be in if you're a general manager, but you're only in this scenario if you are finding good players that are forcing you in this situation, which means you're having success. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, but I'm very intrigued to see both Wyatt Johnston and Jake Ottinger, what happens this year, and how does that affect their market 12 months from now?
Yeah, I mean, big years for both. Sean Shapiro and I were talking on yesterday's Spits and Suds. Lucas Raymond signed an 8-year, $64.6 million contract with the Red Wings. He's 1 year older than Wyatt Johnston. That's an average annual, just over $8 million. Sean says that's the starting point for Wyatt Johnston if you want to go long term.
Yeah, I don't disagree with Sean. I thought the Beniers extension,
Yep.
which was around mid sevens, I think, earlier this summer. I thought, okay, there's the starting point, there's the number. Lucas Raymond might have just driven up that market because the one thing that Wyatt Johnston has over both of those players is playoff performance. And
good point.
Jake Ottinger could change that this year. I mean, if the Stars get into a deep playoff run, but Jake Ottinger finds another level, that now changes his market compared to something that maybe Jeremy Swayman has or has not done in his young NHL career. So that there's a lot riding on this season. I feel like not just for the Dallas Stars as an organization, as testing new broadcast waters or trying to chase down a Stanley Cup opportunity, but also for players individually and how it's going to affect the organization's long-term health. Like, there is a lot. Jim Nill acknowledged it today. This is a really, really big year for this organization with a lot of different things floating out there. And now we all want answers immediately. We'd love to have all the answers at the end of October or November. We're going to have to wait a full hockey season before we get clarity on some of these things. But there's a lot to keep an eye on here, big picture on what's going to happen with the Dallas Stars.
And in today's salary cap world, it's a fair comparison, Brian, to what the Dallas Cowboys just went through, where you're seeing all these massive QB quarterbacks. And if you say, if you had just signed Dak earlier, you would have saved $10, $15 million. And I'm sure there are people out there that are saying, sign Wyatt Johnston now. You've already, gone up 2 contracts. So it is interesting, but I think they have to wait based on the cap. And that leads us to 2 signings yesterday, which I thought were very good value. And I think this is one of the many reasons that Jim Nill is the reigning 2-time GM of the year. Lindell with a 5-year extension, as well as Thomas Harley, 2 years, $4 million a year. I thought that was a terrific contract. I appreciate Harley's camp understanding because of the salary cap that they couldn't go long term.
Yeah, I would agree. And just to get back to one thing you were mentioning, just with the different contracts and everything that's going on. Sure. I mean, you would love to sign all your best players long term. The thing that I always have to remind myself, and I try to remind fans, it's one thing to try and sign a player in the PlayStation be a GM mode.
Yeah.
It's another thing to go to the player and the agent and say, we'd like to talk extension. And on the other side, they might say, we'd like to wait a year and see how things go.
Sure.
And see, there's 2 human elements at play whenever you get into a contract negotiation, not just one, not just the team side. The player and the agent also have a choice in the matter a lot of times on when or how to discuss and determine extensions. And I do the Lindell extension, I think it caught a lot of us by surprise.
Yes.
I do like the value of it. Sure, there's always going to be concern if you're taking a player into, say, his age 34 or 35 year on a $5 million plus contract. But would you rather have Lindell, say, age 30 to 35 at that number, or would you rather be Toronto dealing with Chris Tanev at a similar number, 35 to 40, essentially? And that's sort of the give and take that Jim Nill had to battle with and not being able to bring Chris Tanev back. So I am glad they locked in Lindell and what he does do that's not production related. I agree with you on the Harley contract. I think we all expected a bridge deal of some kind, just given where this team is at in its salary cap structure. Once the Jamie Benn number changes after this year, that might open up some flexibility long term. And then I think we're looking down the line, the Tyler Seguin number.
Yep.
How does that affect things down the line for somebody like Thomas Harley or, a Maverick Bork or a Logan Stankoven as they move over to the next few years of their entry level contracts? Like it never stops, right? When all these contracts get staggered, you always have good players in your system, but you're always having to look over the hill at the next guy that's coming up saying, all right, how do we manage this? How do we manage this? How do we manage this? So I like both contracts yesterday. I'm excited for both players, and I'm excited to see for Harley. This is now really 2 big seasons or a year and a half of really high level hockey that he's produced and finding his comfort zone. Is he anchoring his own pair? Is he back with Miro Heiskanen? I'm sure we'll see both scenarios throughout the season. But what kind of growth does he have? As we've been talking about Johnston and Ottinger, Harley's another guy in that core group of, all right, what's next for you as a player, and what can you do for the blue line here?
And I think that's very fair. I think it's okay to say, wow, what an outstanding future this kid could have, but at the same time say, maybe it was a wear-down factor, but toward the end of last year and in the playoffs, we saw a little bit of a different Thomas Harley, and some errors that he made during the playoffs, and that's okay. We also have to remember that he's a young kid, and this isn't a veteran D-man, so we have a good one, but I'm excited about the 2 years because if he plays the way we expect him to play, he's going to get paid a lot of money. So I think this is good for both sides.
Yeah, and I look at that playoff run last year. There, whether it was the power play against Edmonton or the depth scoring or some players having issues. I looked at that Edmonton series, honestly, and I thought to myself that they looked tired.
Yes.
They looked worn down. And I thought we were seeing more the toll of the Vegas in Colorado series and less, oh, this player's worn down. He's never played this much hockey. I just thought that whole team was worn down a little bit by the first two series they had to go through. And the other thing, too, since we're talking about Thomas Harley, you basically went through those first two series with only 5 defensemen. A significant chunk of that first part of the playoffs, you were rolling 5 D-men. So now everybody's picking up minutes for 2 of arguably the hardest series that were played in the opening 2 rounds of the playoffs. I just thought as a team, as a 20-man unit, it caught up to them in that Edmonton series. Edmonton continued to serve. I mean, they made quick work of LA. I just didn't think they had to go through as damaging of a road to get to the Western Conference Final. And so they had something in the tank to continue to ascend, where I thought the Stars, they had to blow through too much jet fuel to get through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. And I thought, for me, that's how I viewed that Edmonton series and what the Stars were dealing with.
Also announced today some additions to the hockey operations department, and the name that I think Stars fans will love to know that are in the organization. I think this is really cool. They've done it with Rich Peverly, who, by the way, like we had him on Spits and Suds last year. I know you know him, Brien, as well. This is to me, a future GM candidate. He's terrific in his position with the Stars. Jordie Benn enters player development and also will do some scouting as well. I love to see those names that Stars fans love. Ben Bishop's another guy that's around the organization. Vern Fiddler has been around the organization. It's really cool that they're taking some guys and bringing them into various roles within the organization.
Yeah, and I mean, Jim spoke glowingly of Jordie and taking on a role like that. The thing I like about a player like Jordie, there's the personal side, and he's obviously well known by this fan base and by the organization, and that's going to have a profound impact. The thing about Jordie Benn is when you're undrafted and your career starts in the Central Hockey League, and I was a Central Leaguer, so I saw Jordie play with the Allen Americans.
Sure.
You can look at an AHL kid with all the talent in the world, and he may be wondering why he's not getting this opportunity or that opportunity, or he feels that he might have more to give in a certain place, but he wishes things were a different way. Jordie Benn can look at him and go, you want to go play in the ECHL or you want to go play in this league? Because that's what I did. And I can tell you right now, it is awful to have to go through that as opposed to playing in the American League. It's what do you have to give to try and create that opportunity? But like Jordie Benn, when you start in the Central League and get to the NHL, not just for a cup of coffee, but for legitimate hundreds of games at the NHL, you have figured out, one, how to maximize your talent to the highest ability that you can, how to leverage a role for yourself in every team you've been on, and how to smartly survive at the highest level and find a way to stay in there for a long period of time. That's not that's not a talent that players just sort of are born with. Like, you have to learn that. And some players can embrace it and leverage it to create a better hockey future for themselves. Some players don't. Justin Dowling, a blast from the past for Stars fans,
great name,
is another recent one. Yeah, but is another recent one who was sort of trapped in the American League and then found an opportunity for himself when Jim Montgomery was the head coach and leveraged it into roughly 2 full seasons at the NHL. Like, you have to figure that out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody like Jordie Benn might be able to open the eyes of some young kids that have not figured that out or are having trouble acknowledging that element of the game, which is key, which is super key. And then the other thing, and just on a personal note, the name you didn't mention, Matt Mangine, coming in as a professional scout. I was with Matty Mangine when he was with the AHL's Texas Stars. He was one of my favorite players to cover. Incredibly nice, wonderful human being, a diehard, bloodthirsty LSU football fan. So there is a Raging Cajun Go Tigers fan that has now entered the scouting ranks of the Dallas Stars, and he is not afraid to wear his purple and gold. So I was extremely excited to see him get to continue the next step of his hockey career, not as a player, but as a scout. I hope he does a fantastic job. I hope it goes well for him, and I hope it creates some great opportunities for him, because he was just a good dude, a supreme good dude. And
that's awesome.
During one of his seasons in the American League, he's a defenseman. He's a defenseman at heart. He's always wanted to play defense. He had to play forward, essentially. He was a swingman for an entire season because of injuries and call-ups. And I don't know if he ever said one complaint or one bad word of it. But could you imagine having to play? You're going to play 4 games in a week, and twice you have to play forward. Twice you have to play the defense. Sometimes you'd have to go back and forth. In the same game, he would have to swing back and forth because the Stars would dress 11-7, and they would just use him and rotate in as a 12th forward on a night. He was the ultimate Swiss Army knife at the American Hockey League level. I was super excited to see him on that list of names.
That's cool. 607 games to be exact for Jamie Benn in the NHL, which is a hell of a run. That is, wow. That is pretty awesome. I'm just going to throw another name out there who will be at training camp that I think a lot of players like Maverick Bourque and Logan Stankoven will mention that I see a future in coaching if he wants to do it or somewhere in the organization. Curtis McKenzie and what he's meant to the organization.
Especially the AHL. He's another guy similar to Jordie Benn, where he was undrafted and then he played himself into an NHL contract, essentially, out of Miami of Ohio. I think he was. I don't know if you have him up on your computer there. Was he undrafted? I think he was undrafted.
Let me check.
Out of Miami of Ohio. But he's the captain of the AHL's Texas Stars, right? So it's kind of, the captain can help deliver the head coach's message if the head coach is maybe being tuned out a little bit. Sometimes it's not the message, it's the messenger. Well, Jordie Benn could deliver the same message, but it's not coming from the captain or the head coach. It's coming from a guy with 600 plus games in the NHL who's more of a development coach style, or vice versa. Maybe if Jordie Benn mentioned something to a young AHL player and that player had already heard the same thing from Curtis McKenzie or the head coach Neil Graham, well, now the validation has just been driven even further of, wow, 3 different guys from 3 different sources are telling me the exact same thing. Either there's a conspiracy that they're all making it up, or it's actually true and I should probably listen to it.
Yeah.
So yes, and Macker was another guy that I was lucky enough to work with down in the American Hockey League. And I think he has fully embraced his role as Travis Morin retired down there. Curtis McKenzie essentially picks up the mantle where he left it off and took over as the grizzled older vet who knows what it takes to get there, because he had to fight so hard just to get his cup of coffee. So you have to respect the fact that he's been there and he's gone through it, but he's also an AHL teammate to younger players and part of the development process that Jim Nill wants in place to say, listen, You may think you know everything, or you may think this is how you're used to doing it. But if you want to have the same success, you have to embrace A, B, and C at this level, and you will see the results if you stay honest to them.
6th round in 2009 by the Stars.
6, that's right. I knew he was at least a late round guy. Yes.
But you're right. It's really important. That's what I love about the game of hockey, Brien. We'll end on this. It's just like, hockey, just like other sports, is so focused on analytics, and I get it, and I appreciate it, and they're great deep dives. And on Twitter, people throw out analytics all the time. But what analytics doesn't show is at the dining room table, Wyatt Johnston sitting with Joe Pavelski and the family and learning. It doesn't talk about how Sidney Crosby lived with Mario Lemieux. It doesn't talk about Curtis McKenzie telling, the guys, this is how you do it, or playing on the same line, which allows, sacrificing himself, which allows Bork and Stankoven room. And if you don't think it does provide room, it certainly does, because if you mess with one of those guys, Curtis McKenzie will be in your face. Those are the aspects of hockey that I love, that tells more than a story. I love when people say he's a good room guy. He's needed in the room. Like that's not analytics. That's just hockey.
Yeah. It's, the way I would phrase it is there's no analytic for mental makeup.
Yeah.
Is a great way to phrase it. I'm an analytics guy. I love the numbers game. I love the information, but as long as there's analytics and there's the eye test, there's always going to be the never-ending battle of good versus evil, eye test versus analytics. And I've never understood why it has to be a battle. At the end of the day, players and coaches want information. And the more information they have, it feels like it gives them the best weapons possible to determine what is the best lineup I can put on the ice to win a hockey game. And so all it is complementary information. And sometimes the analytics may tell the exact story of what's going on with a game or a player. Sometimes it may not tell the story at all as what's going on with a game or a player. And so just as much as there is a place for analytics in determining outcomes or determining evaluation, the eyeball test or the mental makeup is also equally important to determining the evaluation of teams and players. So, I agree with you, but yeah, there's no such thing as an analytic for mental makeup.
See, Brien, this is why people request you. You're a beast.
I thought it was just because of my pop culture references lamely on Twitter, but whatever if we're giving Jordan in Canada and whoever in England, God bless the two of them. Right. If we're giving them what they want, then great. I'm sure the downloads will increase back to normal numbers when Shapiro gets back on here with you. But I'm glad we're working with our international fans.
Listen, it was Shapiro, it was you, and then on Monday it was Bang Guy, Nick Maroc. So
I know. I'm sure that was interesting as well.
It was very interesting, as a matter of fact.
Did he bang the table in the background as you were asking him questions?
I give him a ton of credit. He wore the white sports jacket in. That was just classic. I loved it. I actually know him for years.
I've met him a couple of times, and the few times I've met him, he's always been very nice to me. Do you think does he sleep in that thing?
You know what?
People have wondered if I sleep in my suits. I think you got to wonder, does Nick sleep in his white tuxedo or whatever he wears? I think that's a bigger question.
I asked him about that, and I'm glad I did, because his father was a season ticket holder to the Stars, and his father was a traditionalist as far as, just like the old school days, he liked wearing a coat and he liked to wear that white sports jacket. So it's actually a tribute to his dad.
Sure. Very cool.
So I thought that was really cool. And the reality is like I told him, it's like, I personally feel as though, fan is short for fanatics. I love when people like Bang Guy and characters are in the crowd, because I think that's how you build a fanatical barn, so to speak. And what I love hearing from players after they leave the AAC was, you know what? Dallas is not an easy place to play.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. And it does add, it makes your experience unique. Or as best as you can make it unique when you have individuals like that. I would agree. It's the Green Men in Vancouver. It's the Towel Guy in St. Louis. Yeah. It's, I'm sure there's a handful of others around that run around, or do some antics throughout different different teams, different barns throughout the league. It's part of what makes a barn unique. It's the Unleash the Fury in DC with the Caps. So
yeah. I mean, we'll have him on, but I mentioned Italy. One of our listeners is named on Twitter Flo Wee, and he asked really good questions. So one day I just direct messaged him. I'm like, man, you really know your hockey. Have you been involved in hockey? Turned out he played professional hockey in Italy for years.
Yeah,
and looked him up on HockeyDB, and sure enough, there it is. All of his stats and everything. And I just think that's super cool when you hear stories and learn about our listeners. And to me, that's why I love stories from you, from Sevy, from Ludwig, from everybody. That to me is one of the components that I love about this program. So download Victory Plus, everyone. Before it's, you can always download it, but get it ready because preseason is right around the corner. As I mentioned, Brien is going to be in, what would you say? I would say almost playoff form by preseason game 1.
Yeah, we'll see about that. It was a off the radar, low key summer for us in the Rea household. So I have to get out of beach mode or get out of my Jimmy Buffett mode and find a way to get back into hockey mode as quickly as possible here.
Well, I hope they use you a lot because I love your personality. I know our Spits and Suds listeners love your personality. Thank you so much for taking the time on the eve of training camp for spending some time with us on Spits and Suds.
Always good, buddy. I will talk at some point down the season. Always good to check in with you.
Absolutely. That's Brien Rea of Victory Plus, and thank you for joining us, and thank you for the offseason numbers we've had right here on Spits and Suds. We'll talk to you soon. Have a great day, everyone.